Hello, sorry, I was having some technical challenges. So, welcome everyone today to today's review session. My name is and I'll be your moderator for today. Just a brief uh, welcoming remark. I want to tell you about the ARIN Fellowship Program. This is a program which is consisting of a network of talented researchers and technocrats across Africa who have been undertaking research in various fields. This is from natural resource management, climate change, to agriculture, forestry, energy, water, cities, and sort of. They leverage their knowledge and experiences in promoting research excellence and impact pathways. So these researchers, to engage them, we usually have these Friday reviews, which we look for someone, a presenter, who can give us or share their best transformative research on various topics, the ones that I've mentioned, and we identify how this research can innovatively and flexibly contribute to our transformation as Africans. So having said that, I just want to go straight to our today's topic and introduce the speaker as well. So our today's topic is about empowering communities through the local climate change vulnerability assessment in areas with external land use changes in Africa. So you know very well, like the communities, researchers and scholars and policymakers always sit together, they discuss the impact of climate change, but they often overlook at the local communities who are the most affected because you know these people, the locals, they depend on natural resources for survival and livelihood. So talking of the land use changes, we'll talk of deforestation. These people do deforestation. They do croplands where they cut off trees or clear forests to change that land to agricultural land. They also do forest degradation as well, and these have impacted them so badly. And as this time, or as we continue to talk about climate change, we need to focus on these local people. What should be done? How can we know, or how can we help them overcome their challenges? So, having introduced that, I think that's it in a nutshell. We'll talk of the. I'll introduce the speaker. Sorry, our speaker today is Dr. Moses Wabusya. Dr. Moses is a lecturer from the Department of Biological Sciences, Moi University. He's also a researcher. He has done a lot of research and publications. And today, publications on environmental conservation as well. So today, you'll take us through this presentation and you let us know, us as researchers or policy makers or scholars, what can be done differently? What can we do apart from doing our research and publishing those books and putting them in the shelf? What can we do? How can we practice or make this research work into practice in order to help these locals or the grassroots people to mitigate the impacts of climate change? So thank you. And in case you'll have a problem or a concern or a question, feel free, amidst the presentation, feel free to put in the comment section. We'll address that after the presentation. So at this juncture, I'll welcome Dr. Wabusya. Please go ahead and take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lavender. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are very audible. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I want to appreciate for this opportunity where I can share experience about information on climate change, land use practices, and how we can be able to mitigate, and adapt to these effects of climate change. Having said that, I want to say good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you've been told, my name is Wabusya from Moi University, Department of Biological Science, well anchored in environmental biology. I've done a number of research that is on soil, on climate, forestry, part of GIS and remote sensing, and also I've also done some work in nematology, where we look at how nematodes also affect and how they can also contribute in terms of monitoring climate change. Now, today, I want us to learn something about community empowerment through climate change vulnerability assessment in areas with extreme land use changes. I mean areas with extreme land use changes. That aspect of extreme land use changes is very, very important. But before we start, we need to acquaint ourselves with the information about climate. When we define, and this one everybody else understand what it is, when we define climate, we look at the weather conditions of any given region at a particular time for a period of over 30 years. And when we say a period of over 30 years, it clearly now brings out the kind of weather elements that exist. And the weather elements here, I'll be talking about things to do with rainfall, things to do with temperature, wind, humidity, precipitation process, cloud cover, insulation, and all that. And basically, now, if having looked at that, you'll now realize that if there is any change on those particular weather conditions, then that is what we shall refer to as climate change. When we talk about climate change, now we also ask ourselves, this is for how long, for how many years, or what is the period duration in between? Then it must also come out clearly. This is something that there's a change, abrupt change that will persist for some time. And this one usually comes along with a number of things. So we define climate change as the average weather conditions, the change in average weather conditions such as precipitation and rainfall in any given region for over a long period of time. I'm picking temperature and rainfall with reasons, because temperatures manifest themselves so easily, and rainfall again manifests itself so easily observable, and you can even be able to quantify. But we have other elements that also change, but you cannot easily visualize them. So when we talk about vulnerability, when we talk about climate change, those are the key aspects we bring in. Climate change, as it is a challenge, and it poses a lot of challenges or uncertainties from both global level, regional level, and at local level. Initiatives have been in place where, from global level, people come up with ideas on how best we can be able, to mitigate and adapt and even be able to, control this aspect of climate change. But we rarely forget, a number of times, we rarely forget that when that one is happening, the local community does not even participate in formulation of those mitigation approaches, adaptation approaches. So it is very important that we look at climate change from a landscape point of view, from a local point of view. Which are these factors that are contributing to climate change in that given region? Because when you talk about climate, then you must also bring in the aspect of a microclimate and a macroclimate. Next slide. Next slide. Now, how does climate change manifest itself? That's the question each and every person right now is experiencing and understands. But do you think you understand it well or you get it correctly? Climate change, it's obvious, manifests itself through an increase or a decrease in mean temperatures. Currently in Kenya, those of us who are in Kenya, I'm in Kenya, that is Rift Valley region. We have more rainfall, temperatures are equally very low. Does it mean that is climate change? The answer is yes. These are the effects of climate change. Then the same thing applies to rainfall. We are in Kenya currently, as we talk, we have heavy downpours. And this particular time is the time where we expect, we have, short rains, and temperatures will be a little bit moderate, not very high, not very low. But what is being experienced now, you realize that we have a lot of rainfall, which has not been the thing. Those are some of the effects or how climate change manifests itself. Again, when we look at vegetation, when we look at our forests, you realize that a number of them are reduced. And you ask yourself, what is happening and why are they reducing? These are some of the effects because we are trying to adapt. So we'll end up, clearing the vegetation. We end up, degrading or logging process will now continue. That is in forest. And at the end, it will now aggravate the whole process of climate change. And, at the end, there will be more emission of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, as well as, affecting the soil health status. Another thing is loss of biodiversity. When we talk about manifestation of climate change in terms of loss of biodiversity, I mean, we have some species that cannot be able to, cope the low temperatures or maybe high temperatures. Definitely, if we have a change in climatic conditions, those species will be lost. And we've had this for a number of times. We have even some of the species that have just gone extinct. That is both flora and fauna. And this one happens because if we talk about flora, if there is a climatic change in any given region, definitely the soil health status will be affected, where there'll be more overleaching taking place. Again, soil health status will lose much more of carbon because it will be completely, emitted to the atmosphere. Then generally now, the nutrients in that given soil will be completely affected. And when they're completely affected, it also now contributes to the aspect of loss of species in that given area. In Kenya and part of East Africa, the past 2, 3 years, we've had issues. We've had pests, fall armyworms. We have desert locusts, and other diseases have also come up. This is a challenge that has not been there. But you ask yourself, why do we have this challenge at this particular time? The response is, do you think what we are doing in terms of land use practices is right? The answer is no. That is what is contributing. So that at the end, we are releasing more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And when we release more carbon atmosphere to the atmosphere, temperatures will change, rainfall patterns will change, and they now even give room for the pests to be able to thrive because now it gives room for them to have a good conducive time for their life cycle to be complete. And these pests, when they come, they also spread diseases. They are basically vectors. And now we talk about outbreak of diseases and pests. We also have rise in sea level in coastal region, which will also increase that. There is also the aspect of floods, droughts, and wildfires as consequences of climate change. And that is how they manifest, it manifests itself. Next slide. Now, what are the key drivers? What are the key drivers of climate change? We have natural drivers and human-induced drivers. Natural drivers, as humans, we can be able to control that. However, our ability is somehow limited. But when we talk about natural drivers that contribute to change in climate, they include natural phenomena as volcanic eruptions, fluctuations in solar radiation, those are insolation, tectonic shifts or movement. They contribute that. The question is, how do they contribute? Anytime we have a volcanic eruption, it will definitely lead to production of more of carbon dioxide that will be taken to the atmosphere. And when it accumulates, it will cause the greenhouse effect. And at the end, it will now alter the whole climate of that given region. When we talk about insolation, that is the solar radiation, they also contribute because you cannot be able to control that. But solar radiation will now contribute in a manner, one, that is during precipitation process. And then after precipitation, we'll also have this aspect of evaporation, and we shall have over evaporation. And at the end, water tables and all water towers will be affected. And then lastly, we also have changes in our orbitary kind of movement, where now it will affect the planetary kind of warming and cooling patterns. And the moment they change, now in that given area, the whole weather elements will be affected and will have a ripple effect to these other elements that now affects climate. Next. How about human induced? And this is where we are going to dwell. This is where my study is anchored, or this particular, talk is anchored about human induced drivers. It is documented that 11% of drivers that contribute to climate change is agriculture. And when we talk about agriculture here, I mean which type of land use practices are being practiced. That is to say, under normal conditions. If someone is practicing, for instance, planting perennial crops, and there's another person planting annual crops, how does it contribute in terms of carbon sequestration? Because carbon sequestration or emission of carbon for oxide into the atmosphere, that is what contributes most to the climate change. Again, we have grazing, we have keeping natural forests, we have reforestation, we have agroforestry, we have planting of like even horticulture. How do they contribute to climate change? This talk is going to be anchored on that. Next, we have commercial and residential kind of activities and settlements. Here, if you did a GIS and remote sensing kind of research, you will discover that any place that is not covered with green or vegetation is always brown. And that indicates that is bare land. And this bare land now reflects much more of the solar energy from the sun back to the atmosphere, which will now affect the temperature in that given area, that will later on affect the precipitation process where there is rain formation now. And now the rains in that given area will definitely be affected. Rainfall patterns will change. Industrial kind of development. For industry, it is very important to note that these industries pollute environment. And they pollute in which sense? They release gases to the atmosphere. And most of the gases that are released to the atmosphere are greenhouse gases that will now couple up with the insolation from residential settlement, from commercial settlement, and those from agricultural land, and contribute great to the aspect of climate change. We also have transportation. And where we talk about transportation, there's this aspect now of fossil fuels, burning of fossil fuels. The same thing happens when we are using electricity, because a number of times, like especially in developed countries, they use coal to generate their energy. And at the end product, we'll be releasing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So if we look at these drivers, from a local point of view, we must ask ourselves, how can we address the problem of climate change at a local point or at a landscape level? Then it means we must come up with a way where, we can be able now to aggregate all this and get a better way or a more sustainable approach that can help us to continue practicing. And as we practice, we don't affect, the climate in that given region. And this leads us to the study that we've done in Western region part of Kenya, where we look at, the land use practices or the so-called land cover in form of vegetation. And then after that, we try to come up with an indices or an index that can be able to predict vulnerability levels, that can be able to give us more information in relation to predicting the climate change in that given region. Lavender? And because of that, now we move to what we call climate change vulnerability. Now, when we talk about climate change vulnerability, what does it mean? Climate change vulnerability simply refers to the susceptibility of a system or an ecosystem, or the propensity where an ecosystem is likely to be harmed from the effects of climate change. Lavender, is there a problem? I can't see the screen. Hello?
Just a minute, Doc, just a minute.
And now, when we talk about, vulnerability, now we focus on the aspect of how we can integrate the key drivers of climate change into a single kind of a tool that we can use to predict changes in climate, and we can use in terms of predicting the best practice with regard to conserving the environment, with regard to production of food, with regard to production of clean water and all that. So that at the end, if that one is happening, then we shall release very little carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And it will not affect climate, and will now have it sustainable. So if that is the case, then what is this vulnerability index or climate change vulnerability index? I think you are right there. So when we talk about a climate change vulnerability index, this is a mathematical expression that has been formulated from the elements of weather that affect climate, then given some function where if you compute, it will give you a composite single figure, and that figure will now be able to depict exactly your level of vulnerability. And when I say your level of vulnerability here, I mean it will be able to bring out exactly how safe are you, or how jeopardized are you in that given area. You could be endangered, but you don't know. You are planting crops, you are harvesting well, you are doing everything very well, but you are causing a problem to that given area. So this tool can be used as a yardstick where now all stakeholders and the community at large will be referring to, so that now they say, if we have to plant trees, then at least we must have a maximum number of trees up to this particular level. And the trees should not go below this particular number. It gives a threshold, and the threshold here now will help in terms of curbing the effects of climate change. Now, it also characterizes an area based on the practices that are being done. And because we also carry out a social kind of survey to get to understand how these people are informed about on this issue of climate change, you realize that they'll also give you information and their perception. Are they aware? And how best can they be able to adapt? And what are they doing? What is their initial knowledge with regard to that? Now, when you integrate that, you give them weights, and it will now be able to help you to predict and give more information localized for that given area. What I'm trying to say is we've had climate change vulnerability indexes all over. Here in Kenya, we have these indices, but generated at the national level, where it helps in terms of resource allocation. It helps in terms of the type of varieties of crops to be planted, because we have our labs that are working effectively, and people are working very well in the lab, coming up with varieties of seeds. So they rely on such a kind of indices so that they know, if we go here, we are introducing this type of cane. Like, for instance, if they are doing maybe a maize, and we are talking about 614, we know very well 614 variety of maize grows very well at a particular altitude. Then there's rainfall of this particular amount, temperatures of average this particular amount. So if somebody did an index of that given area, he will easily get the information. So if they're going to introduce the crop, they know it will thrive well and it will not affect the underlying or other weather elements that are there. So this tool has been developed, but at national level. But we ask ourselves, is it really effective? Because the effects of climate change usually are experienced locally in that given area. When we talk about flooding, it can happen right there, fine. But floods will happen at that particular localized level. Like, for instance, in Kenya right now, when we talk about the Asal area, we go to northeastern, we design a climate change vulnerability indices for northeastern region, where we help them to know very well in terms of planting trees, how best can they use their water. And now from there, we also teach them, because from there, we also have the socio-economic aspect. How best can they be able to use that, interpret, and if possible, if we improve on this, we can even come up with a mobile app with the indices, where now people just simply input the figures, it gives an index, a single number, which can be interpreted, and it will give information with regard to levels of vulnerability. So any given nation requires this particular tool. Any given region requires this particular tool. And that is why we are saying we actually have to customize all this and bring it back to the local community, where every region will have its own. And from there, now it will be clear if we are coming up with the mitigation measures and approaches of adaptation, it will be very clear for us to implement that. Next slide. Now, how do we develop a climate change vulnerability index? And why should we develop it? I think I've explained that one in details. It's actually very important, because if we localize or we come up with an index of only a particular area, it will be able to iron out the generalization that exists or the blanket decisions that are made at national level, in such a way that, for instance, if we took a good example of Kakamega and Nandi region, Kakamega has the remaining tropical rainforests currently. And this is a region that is now, the members at that particular place are highly vulnerable, because they fear they are so much used to the forest and the effects of the forest, because they have constant supply of rainfall, the clean air, water is readily available. So anything that alters the forest, they are highly vulnerable, they'll be affected. So if we take a good example and we start looking at Kakamega Forest in terms of carbon sequestration, in terms of the land use practices, in terms of other other elements, then we'll pick up a number of things. Next slide. Lavender, next slide, please. Now, in Kakamega, before I talk about the index, in Kakamega, we have the tropical rainforest. And this tropical rainforest, gives a lot of services, both economic and ecological services, to the community surrounding. But because this forest, is existing and the population is growing, people have started infringing into the forest. And when all that started, they introduced a scheme called Nyayo T-zone. The Nyayo T-zone was meant to be a buffer so that people cannot access the forest, or it prevents people from getting right into the forest. So Nyayo T-zones, for your information, this is a zone around the forest where the farmers are allowed to plant tea. And when they plant tea, they sell and make profits. But this plantation of tea is actually preventing these farmers and other people and natives from encroaching into the forest. This initiative was introduced, but to some level, it was noted that it was not very effective. Then in the same region again, they introduced what we call the Shamba system. And the Shamba system is where the residents are now allocated some pieces of land within the forest where they cultivate, their crops, and also they are given some seedlings, tree seedlings, so that they also take care of the tree seedlings as they cultivate their crops. But at the end, from our study, we noted that the same practice is not very effective. And you'll ask yourself, how is it not effective? Yet they are, cultivating, getting their crops, as well as trees are growing. The response is based on carbon sequestration levels. Because the moment the piece of land is cleared, as much as they're taking care of the trees, the level of carbon dioxide emission to the atmosphere increases. We did a study. We even sampled the soil. Sampling the soil, you looked at soil organic carbon within the vegetation and on the land use practice and right inside. So we noted that indeed, areas where there is Shamba system, we had very low carbon content, soil organic carbon. And in other areas, like especially natural forests that are completely intact, soil organic carbon was very high. And it tells you now the aspect of changes in rainfall pattern, the aspect of changes in temperatures within that given region. It's about the vegetation cover. It's about the land use practices. We did the study. We looked at a number of land use practices. We looked at tea. We looked at grazing zones. We looked at planted forests. People have planted their own or local forests. We have maize. We have horticultural. We have sugarcane. And when you look at them with regard to soil organic carbon, which is a key driver to changes in a local kind of climate, then you realize that indeed the land use practices in any given area contribute, much to the aspect of climate change. And having looked at all those aspects, now we came up with a tool that can help us predict which is the best way. And this tool now is what we are referring to as a climate change vulnerability indices. This tool is formulated in a way that we pick the key drivers or the variables that contribute to climate change and integrate them. When we integrate them into a single formula, we give weights to every land use practice. When I say weights, I mean we give them some kind of a number which gives a definition based on literature or what exists or statistical analysis. Because if we know very well soil organic carbon contributes much more, if we are giving a number from 0 to 1, then we can say soil organic carbon could be 1. It contributes much. Then maybe if we talk about the vegetation, Then vegetation maybe is contributing a little bit of it, then we'll give it maybe a 0.2 or something. So when we compute that, it will give us a single composite number. And this single composite number is what will help us to predict the aspect of vulnerability. It will be able to tell us the aspect of sensitivity to these kind of practices that are existing on the ground. So on this diagram, on this slide here, there is a CCVI where we have the function X or function F. Into bracket, we have soil organic carbon. We have land cover. Then we have the land use cover again, or land use practices. We have the changes in temperature and changes in rainfall. So if we compute that, that is what will give us a single number that will help us to understand. But as we do that, you need to understand that all these are interacting inherently. Because when we talk about land cover here, we are referring to any kind of vegetation on that given land. So it could be forest, it could be like a planted forest, a grassland, and all that. Then we have our land use practices where we simply classify them based on how best can they, or how, to which extent do they contribute to emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Then you realize that they are interacting, because if you reduce the vegetation cover, definitely there will be low carbon fog sequestration into the soil, which means much more of carbon dioxide is being taken to the atmosphere. And when the atom is taken to the atmosphere, it will create a greenhouse effect because it will accumulate, leading to rise in temperatures. Then it will now alter the rainfall patterns within that given area. So as we will give the weights of those characters, you give the weights with regard to that. But you can also award those weights. If you did an experiment, you sampled, you can also run a statistical analysis and have your, if you did a PCA, you did ANOVA, and it will be able to award the weights based on how they contribute to emission. Then now you aggregate together to get this particular formula. And this formula is actually the main tool. It's like a yardstick, it's like a walking stick, where we can have this formula for Kakamega, we can have this formula for Bujumbura, we can have this formula for Cape Town, we can have this formula for Kampala, localized for that particular place. And when now you apply the formula based on what is happening on the ground, it will show you the levels of vulnerability with regard to the land use practices. Then from there, it will help in terms of policy formulation, resource allocation, and in terms of how best can we mitigate and
Haya mkuja ndio. Oh, osha mkono kwanza. Sandra.
One very important thing that we cannot run away is that we cannot talk of conserving the forests completely. When people, are giving birth day and night, population is increasing, there is need of food. What do? We cannot tell people to plant trees throughout. They need to eat. They need to settle. But now the question is, how can this equation, how can this yardstick of ours help us to address such a kind of problems? I've talked about the Shampa system. I've talked about the Pelis, that is the Shampa system. I've talked about the Nyayo Tisons. We should ask ourselves, how is this one going to help us? Because we've already had this. Now, this one comes in as a moderator, because will not be able to use it, will not be able to plant trees completely because people need to plant to have food. And will not be able to plant food everywhere else because there is also need to have fresh air. There is also need to have less emissions to the atmosphere. So this climate change vulnerability indices comes in handy as a yardstick, comes in handy as a moderator that will now help cap all those problems by giving a more sustainable kind of approach where if you are planting sugarcane, if you are practicing maybe grazing, you have to do it up to which particular level. Next slide. Now, from the case study, we came up with an index. Kindly try to expand so that I take you through this index. This is a climate change vulnerability index for Kakamega and Nandi ecosystem complex. If you look at these indices, can you try to expand a little bit? Hello? Fine. If you look at these indices, on the y-axis is all right, I can understand. So let's go on the y-axis. On the y-axis, that is where we have the climate change vulnerability index. And on the x-axis, we have the land use practices, where we have the first one. Sorry, it's all right. I can be able to explain, don't worry. Lavender is all right. You can just leave it the way it is. Now, on x-axis, we have land use practices. Now, after computing these land use practices in our climate change vulnerability indices, you get such a kind of a concave curve. And here, what you need to understand is that we have vulnerability index and we have the land use practices on the x-axis. We are starting with bare land, then we have the bush, we have tea, we have grass, we have agriculture or other land use practices, then we have regenerated forests, and finally, we have what we call natural forest. Looking at that curve, there are those positive signs you can see with different colors. They're actually representing years. They're actually representing years. Now, on the first one, where we have bare land, it's showing the highest, the highest index, which clearly shows that if it's getting to a 1, then bare land is contributing much more to climate change. And now people living within a bare land are highly vulnerable to effects of climate change. If you look at a bushland, a number of times, it has annual plants, and there also exist some gaps right there. You look at it for all the years, it's also around close to a 1. And being close to a 1, the science is behind carbon sequestration. Which are these plants in that particular bushland? And how big are those gaps or spaces or clades in that particular bushland? Which means they also contribute much more to emission of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere that will later on affect the climate of that given land. Then we have tea. If you've ever seen a tea plantation, those are perennial crops. And they have a good greening aspect, kind of a small canopy that covers the ground. It also plays a very important role in terms of sequestration of carbon into the soil. And that is why it's not close to a bare land. Now, I don't want to look at everything here. I look at that and compare with the natural forest. Natural forest is tending towards a 0. What does it mean? that it means that people living close to a natural forest are less vulnerable. Less vulnerable in the sense that there is total or almost 100% of sequestration of carbon into the soil, which means there is less emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And it now establishes some kind of stability where people living in areas with many trees, a number of times they have a kind of a microclimate where air is clean, they have, light energy is conducive, rainfall is available, temperatures are, quite adequate and optimum. So a natural forest contributes to this with regard to the aspect of carbon sequestration. So in a nutshell, when we talk about climate change and this tool we've come up with in the name of Climate Change Vulnerability Index is actually anchored on the aspect of carbon for emission to the atmosphere, so or soil organic carbon that exists, because it's about sequestration. Carbon dioxide is what will contribute to the temperature, is what will contribute to the rainfall patterns of that given region. And what controls this is now the flora on that given area. And what controls the flora is refers now to the anthropogenic activities that exist in that given area. Next slide. So from the diagram, you understand, and from my explanation, is that the index on the bare land is the highest, showing that that area is highly vulnerable, and therefore the bare land, gradually, it gradually reduces until it hits the lowest level, where now as it moves, it gets to a close to a forest. And now that is why you have such a kind of a curve, because when you just come up today and you plant, like for instance, if we talk about Kakamega forest and we are introducing now the Pelis aspect, you see, you'll get a similar curve, because you first of all plant, it will take time. You plant, it takes time, you're watering, up to about maybe 5 years. Now the crop will have come up, the trees will also have come up, they're forming some kind of a canopy. So with the time, until it gets to a certain stage, it's when now it will be able to sequester more carbon dioxide in soil. So when you tend towards the forest aspect or vegetation aspect, having more vegetation, you are more safer. Unlike when you are on a bare land. And that is why we have the concave kind of graph. Which means also that if we leave our soils bare, then there is high rate of soil erosion. There will be loss of soil, of microorganisms or the biodiversity. And again, leaching will be very high. So there'll be low productivity in terms of food. And socio-economically now, there you find people in those given areas, they'll suffer from malnutrition. They don't have a viable economic activities to take place, because they actually, first of all, don't understand that it's their practices that is contributing. So it will affect even availability of clean water. It will affect even these people in terms of just establishing good aspects in terms of food production. So when you tend towards bare land, in a nutshell, you are highly vulnerable. And when you move closer where you have a forest or you have more vegetation, then you are less vulnerable. You are less vulnerable. When we talk about vulnerability, it's always important that from the vulnerability index, you generate what we call a well-being index. And the well-being index now will help you to understand how well are you or how safe are you in that given area. For instance, in Kakamega Forest, let's go to the next slide. For instance, in Kakamega Forest, we looked at the study, we did a study where we assessed the region for the past 30 years. And from our social survey, the residents will tell you the changes in weather conditions. They are actually aware about the aspect of climate change. And they're not very naive. They also have their ways of trying to cope with this. That is, now you find most streams are now disappearing. These people have switched into drilling boreholes, they have wells and all that. Others have understood the whole aspect. They are now doing what we call on-farm tree plantation. Others have switched, they have greenhouse kind of activities, so that they can earn a living and their social livelihood can still continue. They're just trying to adapt. But do you think the adaptation is enough and is viable? The response is no. That is a short lived. So, from our study, based on that index, we discovered that natural forests have the lowest vulnerability. Lowest vulnerability because there is more sequestration of carbon dioxide into the soil. Soils are, very good in terms of nutrients, so they can support even crops. They can support, grazing fields. Soils are very good such a way that you can use them to plant any crop and you'll be able to harvest. So the aspect of food security can also be addressed. And that is why we are saying those people are low in terms of vulnerability. But the moment you start moving away from an intact forest, now that is why we were talking about the Shampa system. You are now clearing so that you introduce some tree species and you start farming right there as you water and take care of the trees. As you do that, you're clearing the ground, reducing the ground cover. So more of carbon dioxide will be going to the atmosphere. So it now makes it more vulnerable. So when you continue like that, it contributes to reflection of heat energy, emission of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And when now you get to a bare land, at the end, you realize there is high emission, and those people right there will be highly susceptible to exposure of effects of climate change. That is to say, intact forests have the lowest vulnerability, and bare land, or when you tend towards bare land, you become more susceptible to effects of climate change. But we cannot run away, just like the way I've said. We need food. We need to settle. You cannot build a house on trees, on vegetation. No. You need to have space for you to build a house. You need to have space for you to move from one place to another. That is transport. You need to create a road. You need to come up with industries for employment, for these people to improve. You need space for people to put up schools. You need space for you to put up hospitals and all that. That is what contributes to aspects of vulnerability. Because the moment you clear, it reduces the levels of sequestration and increases the aspect of emission to the atmosphere. So the question is, which is the best approach so that we can have our food, we can be industrialized, we can have good roads, and we can also have sufficient or adequate vegetation cover that can be able to sustain the weather conditions in that given area. The way to go here is to have this yardstick tool as a moderator, the climate change vulnerability index that can be localized at a particular region. And therefore, if we have to conserve, then it means we have to continue keeping our forests, doing reforestation, intercropping our crops, or embracing the aspect of agroforestry in every aspect we do, so that we continue suppressing the element of emitting carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So, based on that, you look at the climate change well-being index. And the well-being index is what I've just been explaining. This diagram here, on the y-axis, we have climate change well-being index. And on the x-axis, again, we have the land use practices. I hope you'll be able to see what is happening here. This curve is actually the opposite of the other curve. Here, if we talk about being well, then we assign a value. The highest value will clearly show that you are more better off. And the lowest value, it will show that you are lesser better off. And with regard to land use practices, again, you realize the first part on the x-axis is bare land and is actually showing a 0.0 index of well-being, which means if you are staying in an area where there is no vegetation at all, you are highly susceptible to the effects of climate change. Unlike somebody who is staying close to a natural forest, somebody who is practicing agroforestry, or who is doing anything that goes towards greening aspect. What am I trying to say here? Is that you are more safer when you have any land cover than none. Any land cover than none, here I mean the ground shouldn't be bare. The ground should have at least some vegetation. And this vegetation here will now contribute to mitigating the effects of climate change, and it will also reduce the aspect of releasing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, and it will also now improve the soil health status in such a way that there will be more carbon sequestration, which will improve the soil healthy conditions. We'll have now, good soil organic carbon, which will be very good for our crops. We'll have phosphorus. We'll have, nitrogen, because there will be very little kind of leaching processes. And when we have all that, then it will be better in terms of well-being. We'll be able to cultivate our crops. We'll be able to plant any kind of crop and harvest. We'll sell, we'll go to school, we'll sell, we'll develop, we'll sell, we'll buy, food and all that. So with climate change, it can well be handled if we have a climate change vulnerability index customized for a particular place or a local region or at a particular landscape. At this point, we must ask ourselves, the animal is climate change. How best can we fight this animal? How best can we attack it? How best can we confront the conflicting effects that arise from all this? The response to this is that any land cover is better than none. Any land use practice that gets towards a greening aspect is better than none. And that is to say, we must embrace the aspect of agroforestry. We must embrace the aspect of reforestation as a path towards controlling the effects or towards being able to adapt to the effects of climate change. Number two, not everybody else understands the effects and the key drivers of climate change. there is also now need to spread awareness through capacity building, through whichever kind of approach, starting from the local level, about climate change and about climate change vulnerability, so that whatever they learn, they can put into practice at that particular point, and it will be geared towards a common goal which have been set by the government, which have been set and is clearly stipulated in our SDGs, and all that will now help control the whole thing of climate change. We live in a system that is governed by laws and policies and regulations. But these policies are always anchored on research, are always anchored on some scientific study that was done so that it can inform them, and the decision they make is actually an informed decision that contributes. So at this point, if we have these tools with us, the idea will be we advise the key policymakers to shift the normal practice and emphasize on sustainable land use practices that are actually meant to restore our usual carbon sinks. And if anything, improve on carbon sequestration in our vicinity. And lastly, we cannot run away. We need to develop. We need food, industrialization, urbanization. As we do that, let us think of embracing green energy. Green energy that will increase efficiency and will have low effects in terms of pollution, where there'll be very little gases being emitted to the atmosphere. And at the end, we'll be able to harvest our foodstuff. We shall have clean water. We shall have well-purified air. And at the end, you realize that we'll be living in a setup that is clear and can be able to be sustainable for the current generation and for the future generation. So our yardstick becomes having a customized, a localized climate change vulnerability index that will be a key moderator for every region, for every local place that will want to control the effects of climate change, that will want to improve in terms of the living standards, productivity, and all that. I would like to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ari, for that well-elaborated and insightful presentation. I think at this juncture, everyone knows what to be done and what should be done and at what level. That was a very well done presentation. We've learned a lot. Personally, I've learned a lot. And just to mention, I think it's high time we just bring out our notion of thinking that something should be done instead of the other, just to say that any land cover or land use activity is very important. What differs is how we do it and when should that be done. So at this juncture, I just want to welcome everybody. In case you have a question, I'll give you some few minutes. Time is well spent. I'll give you like 1 minute just to ask your question. In case you have a comment as well, you can just raise your hand or put in the comment section. I'll read it for you. So yeah, you're welcome. Is there anyone with a question on what Dr. has presented, or you just want a clarification or a comment on the same?
My hand is up, Lavender.
Yes, Daktari. Dr. Donde, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Wabusya. That was an insightful and a very well organized and planned presentation that has enlightened us on issues of climate change, issues of global warming, and what we need to do. And again, it also reminds me of what is being promoted, that is integrated resource management, where all aspects of the environment need to be put into consideration when managing a particular ecosystem. My question or my concern here is that if I followed your presentation well, especially on the graphs that you are taking us through, it was noted that vulnerability level is worse when you consider the bare land as opposed to the natural forest. So my question is, what's your take on these other aspects or principles that are being promoted, the principle of urban forestry, the principle of agroforestry with regards to climate change vulnerability? Would you, for example, support agroforestry as opposed to natural forest with regard to climate change mitigation, or with regards to integrated resource management, where now you balance all the aspects while also putting into consideration the economic need of the community? Because as you've said, natural forest will be the best. But again, now when you bring in the issue of economics, where the community needs to survive, and at the same time, you also need to take care of the issues that bring about climate change. So what will be your comparison in terms of promoting or supporting agroforestry as opposed to natural forest? But you can also make a comment with regards to urban forestry within this area of climate change vulnerability and climate change mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Donde. Thank you very much for your question. Importantly, I also mentioned this, population everywhere in whichever countries, populations are increasing. And when the populations increase, we look at land as a resource. We look at even forests and, all that as resources. But when population increases, these resources become limited in a way. They start shrinking. So the best way to handle such a kind of a scenario is kind of having trade-offs, because we cannot live on empty stomach because we want to be able to conserve our environment. We want to have a good climatic conditions. Urban kind of forestry, then having agroforestry practices is actually a good sustainable approach that we are advocating for. And that is why I say, let us have something, at least as a land cover. And to be more specific, we go for a land cover that can be able to sequester more carbon dioxide into the soil. And as we do that, we don't want to compromise our living and our social status. We need to have food. We need to have, purified air. We need to have good roads. We need to have good houses. So with that, I highly support the aspect of urban, forestry. I highly support agroforestry. And right now, we talk about what we call, on-farm kind of forestation, where every homesteads are now being advised at least to plant about 5 to 10 trees after a certain period of time, so that we can increase the carbon sequestration without, compromising the existing or without affecting other, living, other natural ecosystems that contribute to that, and also without compromising our social living, where we can also have food, we can also be able to move from one place to another, we can also be able to be industrialized. So from what you are saying, it's highly supported, and that is why from that particular index, you'll find that where I have what we call regenerated forest is coming after the natural forest. I don't know if you have responded to your question.
Satisfied, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hand. Is there anyone I'm leaving behind? If not, I'll welcome Charles. Charles, please welcome and give us the closing remarks. Thanks.
I had actually a question. Hello?
Please go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you, Doc, for that presentation. As I'm coming in from the tools perspective or the assessment methods, especially for climate vulnerability. And the last time I saw a database of climate vulnerability tools which have been developed globally, they are close to 719, and quite a number have been piloted in developing countries or Africa. What informed the climate vulnerability index tool that you used with regards to the rest of the tools which have been developed so far?
Yeah, what's your question, please? Pardon?
What may be advantages of the tools that you used in the climate vulnerability index, and then also the well-being index in comparison with the other existing tools, both qualitative and quantitative tools which have been developed to assess vulnerability in different ecosystems?
Thank you, Charles. This tool is anchored on soil organic carbon in any given area. And I said, when we talk about, this tool with regard to integration of soil organic carbon, you find that even soil organic carbon as it is, it can surrogate other land use practices because they contribute towards it. But we picked soil organic carbon based on our statistical analysis and what exists in literature. Just to explain, we have soil organic carbon. Then we have, vegetation. We have, other land use practices. We have temperature. We have rainfall. I'm aware of tools that have been, generated from temperature. I'm aware of tools that have been generated on rainfall patterns, even on humidity. But we rarely look at, soil organic carbon. Yet, it's one of the most important aspects when it comes to climate change. Because when you talk about climate change, it's about the greenhouse effect that will now accumulate, and then for a certain period of time, it will cause climate change. But how do we get to this aspect of greenhouse gases being emitted to the atmosphere? It's about our land use practices. And these land use practices now will affect the levels of carbon sequestration. And if there is low carbon sequestration, it means it's now being taken to the atmosphere. And that is the, the novelty, if I may say, that is the anchorage where we have based on this particular index. So that we analyze, every region has got different levels of sequestration. We can classify. And if we even put this index and be able to extrapolate it in GIS and remote sensing softwares, we can now be able even to map out hotspot areas where we know very well these ones. Here, if you mapped it out, it will tell, because currently as we talk, we have GIS, kind of softwares that can tell you about the above ground carbon of any given region without even you even going there, because there is a way they look at the vegetation, the NDVI index, and from the NDVI index, they will tell you what happens in terms of carbon dioxide being released. And then, through the temperature changes and all that, then you'll be able to, customize and get it there. So this one is actually based on soil organic carbon, unlike these other ones that are based on social aspect and also temperature, rainfall, cloud cover, humidity, and wind. Thank you.
Excellent, Doctor. Thank you. In case somebody else has any other question, can still come. But I would like to really appreciate your contribution, which is it's more of largely academic, but also at the same time looking at the practice and also the policy. So this is the kind of really peer-to-peer learning that we're really encouraging as Africa Research and Impact Network. And it's something that is an action that you have taken, especially taking us through slowly by slowly. I liked how you really presented in terms of, because these tools and the measurements and putting them in practice is quite complex, especially particularly if you look at the discussions on climate change. You go to a conference room or into a workshop and people are discussing, but when you ask, how did you arrive at your argument? And it's quite difficult to justify, because it becomes very difficult also even for Africa to really contribute into the global scientific body of knowledge. And what you have really done is really taking us through, which I believe that the next phase of your presentation, what we need to strengthen is the presence of the policymakers, which I think we didn't have, but you highlighted, because Kenya, for instance, and a number of countries now from the Nairobi Declaration and the Africa Climate Summit 2023, there is that commitment of acknowledging especially the communities as the stewards of the natural resources. And the areas that you have covered are actually occupied by those small-scale farmers. So how do we build their capacity that they to really come and have a discussion and build their case, especially at the policy level? Because if you are familiar with our post-Africa Climate Summit, when most of the political leaders or opinion leaders or policymakers will ask questions around climate change, they were finding it very difficult to conceptualize and present it, yet they are the people's representative. So what I think the support that ARIN can provide, and especially work with you, the Moi University and other academic institutions, is we really structure our presentations and also bring in high-level policymakers. Of course, they don't have my time for 1 hour, but even if it means 10 minutes or 5 minutes to listen and their contribution, because the carbon policy discussions going on, for instance, in Kenya and across Africa, is still more from an informed point of view, because the actors who are discussing that are not grounded from the scientific and the tools and the application of tools in different contexts that we have already shared, from grass ecosystem, forest ecosystem, crop systems, and that is very important. So as an engagement and policy dialogue convener, right, let's still engage, and then maybe the next phase next year is we target now the members of parliament, the high-level policy makers within the ministry, as we shape this carbon carbon credit discussion in Africa. Lastly is especially the discussions at the global level. How far are you going to engage, especially at the COP28? And I'll encourage that if you are not attending physically, you engage virtually, because some of the sessions will be open virtually. So I'll encourage that you and also especially your team, your students, and people you think they are very key in the areas that you have studied, you join virtually the COP28, because this is a COP that is going to look at global stocks tech and then also shaping the global goal and adaptation. But if we don't have this kind of grounded scientific and really practical aspect and the policy aspect, then Africa will not be able to really put our best foot forward. Because I was in Mombasa with the non-state actors, and largely these are advocacy groups, and advocacy groups, they hardly have time to listen to these grounded scientific models and discussions, but they are playing their role, which is very important. But how do we really link together? So thank you very much. And anyone who is prepared for the next session, we really welcome this kind of discussions in Africa, because we don't want Africa to be branded like we don't catalyze knowledge and exchange and co-production of our own skills in terms of human resource tools, and also the application of it beyond the pilot phases. Thank you very much, and we appreciate each one of you, the delegates present, and let's continue building the momentum towards learning. I would like to have your presentation and, of course, the recording so that I listen again. It was really quite grounded in terms of application of the tools. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. And lastly, link up with this FLOCA, the National Financing Locally Led Climate Action, and also one of the projects we are implementing in the Lake region. We are looking at the co-production of adaptation metrics and also resilience index. So these are the practical programs which can now put your academic work into, infuse your academic work, and then we see how it's going to be very impactful at the community level. And those are some of the cases that you are going to present at the COP28 and also beyond. So get in touch with us so that we'll be involving you largely in the locally led adaptation projects funded by IDRC. Arin is leading, and then also the FLOCA, which is led by the Treasury. But of course, we are having the bilateral discussions around resilience and index and also adaptation metrics. Thank you very much. Back to you, Lavenda.
Thank you very much, Charles. That's well taken care of. To all our participants, I would like to thank you for joining today's review. I hope you've learned something. And to us researchers, upcoming researchers, I hope this is an important platform that can help us know what to do and come up with various projects that can be implemented, especially at the local level, that can help not only us to achieve our dreams, but also to enable the community to be resilient and adaptive to these issues of climate change. So at this juncture, I would like to end my meeting. Thanks everyone for coming. You can, oh, sorry, before I leave, I will thank you, Dr. Ari, for coming to give us that presentation. We're also looking forward to engage you more and more following this presentation. We'll engage you more and more in our projects that we've executed or that we are executing, especially the llama that you've been told by Charles. Yeah, so I think that's well taken care of, and I hope you're comfortable joining us as well.
No problem, Amanda.
Okay, thanks. At this, I would like to ask everyone to turn on their videos. We take a photo. Yeah, before we leave, sorry. Benjamin, please turn on your photo. Daniel, Gogo, Florence, kindly let's turn on our videos, sorry. And you can put on a smiling face.
Bye-bye.
Okay, is that done? A minute kindly. Okay, so that's taken care of. So bye-bye, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend, and probably we'll meet in December. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Enjoy your weekend.